happened, Jay?
There
I'm
was this
starting with the.
there was
Okay, here
this
we go.
really fierce jammer who wore, and you're supposed to wear a star cap when you're the jammer, and she had a Mogan David, a Star of David jammer cap that she put on, and her roller derby name was Mazeltov Cocktail. Instead of Molotov. And she was funny. And I got on, it was MySpace that time. I got onto MySpace. I said, I'm having a great time watching roller derby and you're a great jammer and stuff like that. And she ended up coming to my son Kipper's trivia contest at a local dive. And she sought me out and we became friends. And when I started telling her I was interested in this era, she said, well, do you ever celebrate Hanukkah? And I go, no, because I'm not Jewish. And she said, well, you wanna? I'll help. And so she came over and helped us light the candles and sing the blessings and stuff like that. And then I got interested in the story, and a couple weeks later, I had this amazing dream. I had no idea about this amazing thing. I had a dream where I saw the spiritual aspect of Hanukkah, that it was a huge spiritual change that had been driven by God's desire to be more present in people's lives. And I saw the whole spiritual story lay out in front of me. And I said, this is amazing. How come but nobody knows this? And then in the dream, I saw these crowds of people walking happily as they knowing the story. Their faces were shining. They were so happy. And they said, well, who are these guys? I said, these are the people who learned about the story. And said, well, how come nobody does this? Nobody talks about it. I said, well, that's strange. I said, well, what are you going to do? Now that you know it, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to tell people. And the voice that was showing me this said, promise me. So I promised. So that's why I'm here, because of that dream. That's why I'm writing a book, because of that dream. So that's a funny story. Uh, so who is everybody? Should I start talking now?
You yes.
Okay.
Let me just say for folks who wonder, Jay, I'm introducing Jay. He needs no introduction. You're Jay just jumps in, and he's jumped in with the story of Hanukkah, and you are in for a treat, let me tell you. So go ahead, Jay. I'll just leave it at that.
Mm. Well, I had probably the best thing I know about Hanukkah is a line from one of the Talmuds, which says, a man should sell his own clothes to buy the oil for the light to celebrate Hanukkah. That's how big a deal it was back when they were writing the Talmuds. So that's about 500-600 years, more than that, 500-600 years after this event. They wrote this up as such an important event. You should sell your own clothes to celebrate it. And it's now this half-assed fake Christmas thing. It's not a major Jewish tradition to celebrate it. Largely, I do like that the Chabad people are getting these giant portable menorahs that they put on their cars and they drive down the street. You're supposed to celebrate Hanukkah. You are supposed to light the lights and put them in a public space. You are supposed to demonstrate that you have lit the lights because you are part of the tradition. Now, as far as I'm concerned, everybody that I would ever have a chance to meet is somehow or other connected to ancestors that are part of this tradition. So I'm part of the tradition, like 90 steps removed. I'm not Jewish. I'm not Christian. I'm not anybody with a right to talk about this stuff, but I'm talking about it anyway because it's important to everybody in humanity, is my view. Uh, in order to understand this stuff, I'm sorry to say I've got to talk a lot about the history of the Jewish religion, which was something that affected many, many different parts of society, many different ways. Uh, it's a minor holiday to the Jews today because it doesn't have a lot of heavy duty impact aspects to it. Most it's the way that it's described in most of the current Jewish websites and stuff like that is it's a celebration of a successful battle and a cleansing of the temple. But that really doesn't tell the story of what's going on. It's not a little battle, it's a spiritual battle. And it's a big deal for me. I'm going to go to my notes. For bobblers in particularly, this event represents to me the change that provided for the arrival of Jesus into the world as a major incarnation. And what we're seeing is the same crazy situation being made even crazier by the minor incarnation who precedes the major incarnation. And Baba said that every major incarnation is preceded by a minor incarnation. And in this case, the minor incarnation, I believe, is the fellow named Judas Maccabees, who led the final revolt against the Seleucid Empire. Now, what's that mean? I'm going to talk about, first off, what the Jews were doing in the world. They rededicated this temple. I don't think many people know what the temple is all about. If you take a look at the pictures that you see online, or actually there's still remnants of the Herod's temple in Jerusalem, that is not the temple of this era. I'm going to go into how the temple got built, how it got wrecked, how it got rebuilt, and how it got nasty enough that they needed to rededicate it. So first off, we're going to start talking about the origins of the temple. Let's go back to before Moses. Before Moses, there was a family, Abraham's family. God came down and said, "You guys, you're my chosen family. I'm going to take care of you." And then stuff happened, and there was Joseph and coat of many colors and this, that, and the other. Eventually, the Jews ended up as slaves in Egypt, and eventually, God stopped being silent, which he had been for like 300 years, and showed up again and said, "I'm going to get you out of Egypt." And he brought a guy named Moses in to lead these slaves out of Egypt to a promised land. So Moses came down, led these slaves out of Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, manna from heaven. And eventually he got the Ten Commandments. You've seen the movie, so that's exactly what happened. And then he came back down and broke the Ten Commandments because everybody was worshiping some golden calf. And it was at that point, after breaking the Ten Commandments, that God started getting more precise about what he wanted everybody to do. And he actually laid out this whole scenario that there should be a constant act of worship done by the tribes that Moses was leading out of Egypt. So there were 12 tribes, and each tribe was given a specific task to do related to the worship of God. And what they did was this group got together based on Moses's requirements and put together a big encampment, a moving encampment with a big tent in the middle and a bunch of cloth around the outside to say this is the encampment. And the big tent in the middle was called the tabernacle. And you probably have heard about the Ark of the Covenant, the Lost Ark. Well, the Lost Ark, the Ark was a box, and they put into the box the manna from heaven, and they put into some of the manna from heaven. They put the broken tablets of the Ten Commandments in the box, and once they put that stuff in the box began to make smoke and clouds, and the smoke and clouds led the Jews to their promised land over the course of 40 years. And as they went, they would when they finally got to the promised land, which was Canaan, it was a place. And I sort of thought they'd go, hey, this is a real nice place. Thanks. But what it was they had to go in and kill everybody and kick everybody out so that they could take over. So they spent a lot of time having battles. They kicked everybody out and they took over. And that's the Battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down, things like that. At that point, they set up this traveling or nomadic tabernacle. And in the tabernacle, they put the ark. The ark was inside a big tent. And along with the stuff in that tent were these things that God said, you got to do all this stuff. You got to put a little table in there and put 12 loaves of bread on the table, one for each tribe, change the bread once a week. You got to light the menorah. There's going to be a 7-branched candlestick that you're going to light lights on. And there's going to be a big, like, barbecue tub out in front. That's where you're going to light a constant lit fire. And then you're going to sacrifice animals and put them on the fire as a tribute to God. Sacrifices means burning stuff. When you sacrifice, you burn stuff, and the smoke goes up and makes God happy. So far, so good? Are we talking okay? Okay. So here's a big fire. Here's this tabernacle. Here's this tent with the ark in it. And God is now telling one tribe, the Levites, you guys are in charge of making sure everybody does stuff right. You are the priests, and it's your job to tell them what to do and make sure they do it. So one of the 12 tribes of Israel was the Levites. The Levites were the priesthood tribe, and they began to take a look and understand from their prophets what the 187 commandments that were required of the Jews were. You hear about the 10 commandments? There were 187, and these guys wrote them down. And they were like, don't wear clothes that are made from mixed fibers. That's impure. That's a sin. So if you did something like, oh my God, put on a coat that was made from wool and linen at the same time, you were sinful. You were sinful, and God was going to make you unhappy. God was making people unhappy for sinning. And it wasn't just you who would get upset by this, because God said, this sin is going to continue to be punished through you, your family, the next generation, and the next generation, and the generation after that. For the next 3 to 4 generations, you will suffer the consequences of this sin. And that was the Levites' story. You sin, 4 generations of people being hurt. And what is, you're going to end up sick, poor, or dead. And that was the threat of sinning. And the only way to get away from this were for two kinds you could ask: for personal absolution, and there was also tribal, or the family absolution, the whole Hebrew absolution. So what you would have to do is look to the Levites to tell you the specific animal that you had to kill and put on the fire as a sacrifice to get absolution for your sin, so that everybody in your whole family wouldn't be sick, miserable, and dead. We clear? This was a big deal. And it had to happen on a regular basis. There were 3 required festivals when every Jew in the world had to get to the tabernacle area to do sacrifices and celebrate how wonderful it was that they got to do this. So these festivals were Shabbat, Sukkot, and Yom Kippur. And the most important of these was Yom Kippur, where the high priest, the person in charge of the Levites, would do a sacrifice of two goats. And after the sacrifice, if the sacrifice were successful, he would enter into the big tent, past the menorah, past the showbread, into a special curtained area where the Ark of the Covenant was still there, still smoking, still clouds coming out of it all the time. And he'd look in and he'd sprinkle it with some of the blood from the sacrificed goats. And if it was successful, he would see the face of God. And he'd go out and say, "It's all good. I have sacrificed on behalf of the entire nation. The nation's sins are forgiven. You're all absolution for the next year." So that's a big deal. Because if you happen to miss getting the right goat at the right sheep at the right time because you wore clothes that had two fabrics in them, luckily by the end of the year you'd be okay. If you didn't die too fast. Oh, and what happened when you died? What happened when you died is nothing. There was no heaven, there was no hell. You ended up in a misty, nasty, foggy area underneath the ground, and that was it. There was no eternal punishment or eternal joy or anything. It was just like, yeah, you're dead. Too bad. So why you did all this stuff was for your daily life and for the success and well-being of your family who didn't want to get punished just because you wore clothes with two fabrics. So far, so good. Have I gotten this thing? Okay. So this traveling tent show and these arrangements were made, and the Jews would take their traveling tabernacle from one location to another location. Each location would be under the authority of a new tribe, all the different aspects of taking care of the temple, and there were millions of them. He had to make up new claws to hang over the Ark of the Covenant. They had to be swapped out each year. They had to be made in a certain way. They needed special curtain rings on them. All this stuff was being defined by the Levites in extreme complexity and completeness. And the idea was, unless you did everything right, like the Levites were telling you, it was more sickness, death, misery. Eventually, the Jews who run around, they became more and more sort of a power within their geographical area. Uh, Other nations were coming in and trying to stop them from taking over their territories, which they had little battle groups that would go and raid other places and try to take it over. It was typical sort of the times. The They were having trouble organizing since these 12 tribes were each having these different duties and different responsibilities and arguing among themselves, although they'd get together once a year to do Yom Kippur or Shavuot festival and stuff like that. But they would eventually, they pleaded with a prophet named Samuel to give them a king. And there was no king. These were just 12 separate tribes with their own power structures. Judges, they called them. But so Samuel said, I got a guy, Saul, I'm going to make him a king. So he anointed Saul the king of all these tribes, and Saul started taking over and turning the Judeans into a nation that had armies and had organization and stuff like that. So that was the start of the Judean Jewish royal family. Now, Saul didn't do so great. He At one point, the prophet Samuel was saying to Saul, every time you go to battle against somebody, just destroy everything, tear everything down, kill all the slaves, kill all the cows, kill everything, salt the earth, don't leave a trace. I want them gone. And Saul's going like, hey, we could take some of that stuff and then we'd have more stuff. Most countries, when they go to war, they keep some of the stuff. And so he started to sneak keeping stuff. Samuel found out about it. He was so furious. He himself jumped on a horse after one battle, led the whole army in, and made them kill everything, wipe out everything, leave no trace of the people that had been defeated. And this caused a lot of consternation because this was the new form that was being done by the Jews to other countries. They didn't like it. And Saul didn't like doing it. And Samuel didn't like Saul not liking it. So he anointed another guy named David, a little kid, to be the next king. And those two guys, Saul and David, had a lot of interactions, but eventually, after being chased around the country by Saul, being tried to kill, David survived and became the new king. And what he did was to say, enough of this moving this tabernacle around all the place. Let's go to Jerusalem. We'll set up a permanent temple in Jerusalem. Now, what's Jerusalem? Why would he say, let's go to Jerusalem? Jerusalem was the site of the Garden of Eden. It was also the site where Abraham tried to sacrifice Isaac. And it was also the site where Ezekiel was lifted into heaven on a fiery chariot. There was a mountain in this city that became the place that David said, we're going to go to that mountain and we're going to create the temple there. So he tried to do it, but then he was not the world's most he was sleeping with a lot of people, many of them women. And eventually God said, I'm not going to have you be the guy to make the temple. I'm going to have your son, Solomon. That's the guy who's going to make the temple. So Solomon built the temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem on a place called the Foundation Stone, which is still the location. If you go to Jerusalem, the current mosque, I forget the name of the dome of anyway, the dome mosque that's there is built on this large flat green stone that was the original location of Abraham's sacrifice, Ezekiel's being going into heaven on a fiery chariot and stuff like that. And they started to build a temple, and they built it using a lot of foreign labor, and they built it using the natural stone that was part of the Jerusalem situation. They had a beautiful sandstone that became famous and desired all over the place called Jerusalem stone. Slightly pink in the sunlight, a little gray at night, but it's a very beautiful type of fine sandstone. And they were cutting huge blocks of this stuff to make the walls of Jerusalem, which they built walls around, and to make a beautiful temple area that was large and stuff like that. Lots of very much of its own time, getting woods, the cedar from, I don't know, the places, all these things. Very, very fancy. It became an extremely fancy place. And the Levites, I didn't mention how the Levites got paid, did I? All the other tribes, the other 11 tribes of the Jews, all had to work and farm and things like that, do actual labor. But the Levites were paid a tenth, a tithe of a variety of things. The Levites would get, every time an animal was sacrificed, the Levite tribe was given 1/10 of the animal. So in the course of a day at this new temple, you might have 5,000 sheep being sacrificed in one day. Now, when the sheep was sacrificed, they threw away the parts that God didn't like. They kept the parts that God did like. Those got thrown on this fire to be sacrificed. The smoke would go to heaven, but they get to keep the meat. The people who bought the sacrifice would get to eat the meat. They were supposed to eat the meat before they left the temple grounds. and 1/10 of the meat would be given to the Levites as a tithe. Okay, so that's what five every sheep. I don't know. Let's say a sheep weighs about 150, 200 pounds, so probably 100 pounds of meat. So they were getting close to maybe several tons of meat going through to the Levites, which they could then sell for money. And when I mentioned the Shavuot festival, uh, during the Shavuot festival, there were two tithes, and one tithe was a tenth of it was basically the income tax. 1/10 of everything you had made during the course of the year had to be given to the Levites. And the other one was you had to take the same amount of whatever it was and give it to yourself to spend when you went to the festival in Jerusalem. So here's 20% of your income being distributed to the Levite tribe and also to the people who were running Jerusalem, who were the rich people who were running Jerusalem. Who do you think the rich people running Jerusalem were? Levites. It was basically a constant giving of your demanded stuff to the Levite priesthood. Now, the Levite priesthood at the time of David and Solomon were following a Davidic principle of worship and praise and writing psalms and all this stuff. But once it became more just a daily grind sort of thing, you got to go to the temple, you got to make a sacrifice to get over a sin, all these things. It stopped being such a uh, joyful situation and turned into a business situation. It became a thing that you had to do. Are we doing good so far? Everybody raise their hand. Okay, thank you. So this is where things start to get weird with the temple. As the temple became built solid out of stone in one place, it also started to turn into basically a business, a toll booth for uh, getting rid of your sins by paying off with sacrifices the God who was that the Levites were telling you, oh, we just made up, by the way, another 50 rules that mean you're going to be sinful. So they're cranking out rules. They're cranking out this stuff like that. I just want to sort of set the stage here because what happens next is surprising. What happens next in this story is the Babylonians are coming into their prime, and they decide that they've got this country where the people, where the warriors just kill everybody, slash and burn, salt the earth. They're not people they like. They don't trust them. They say, let's just tear the place down. So they invade Jerusalem and tear down the temple. Elephants coming in, knocking down the giant stones. And they collected 40,000 of the Jews of Judea and took them as slaves to Babylon, which is about half the population of Judea. So in Judea, you got a lot of unhappy Jews sitting around by the lakes of Babylon. There we sat and there we wept. And what were they weeping about? Well, everything was gone. The temple was gone. The Ark of the Covenant was gone. The thing that made Yom Kippur and the forgiveness of sins possible was gone. Everything was gone. The prophet Jeremiah, knowing that the Babylonians were coming, took the ark and hid it so they couldn't take it. Because they used to carry the ark around into battle. And the people who saw the ark, the enemies who saw the ark in the battle would collapse right on the spot and die. That's why that's the basic premise of the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's in the Bible. And at one point, the Philistines managed to get the ark and steal it and they took it to their temples, and those temples, the the idols in those temples like melted, and so they take it to another temple and the idol would melt there, and the Philistines said, we don't want this thing around anymore, and everybody who touched the ark started to get tumors. They were covered with tumors. People were, the Philistines carrying the ark said, let's the hell get rid of this thing. Let's send it back. They put it onto a wagon, a driverless wagon with a bunch of gold pieces shaped like tumors to say, here, you take the tumors, we're done. And they just drove the wagon back into Judea. And that's the return of the ark at that stage. This ark had such concern as kind of weapon of mass destruction that Jeremiah was believed, he'd been told that the Babylonians were going to steal it. So he had a bunch of guys hide it, and nobody has any idea where he hid it. That's why it's the Lost Ark. Okay, so that's about the Lost Ark. But that's also about why it's hard for these Jews sitting in Babylon by the lakes of Babylon weeping to say, now what do we do? Everything's gone. So one thing that happened was that there was a kind of a truth commission that got formed generally. They said, maybe what happened was we broke too many of God's laws. Maybe this is our punishment for breaking too many of God's laws. Somebody get the list of laws and let's go through and see what ones we broke, and maybe we can figure out how we put this back together. And that's when they discovered that there was no list of laws. That's when they discovered that people had been saying these things verbally to each other, and some things were written down and others were written down, and the ones that were written down sometimes contradicted themselves. So they said, oh my gosh, we need the list of laws. We need to actually write this stuff down. And it was at that point that the written Torah became part of the deal. There had been no canonical scripture. There was not even a canonical language to write them in. So they came up with the idea of written Hebrew, and they wrote up the Torah in just as close as they could, saying, here's all the stuff we know for sure. This stuff happened. These laws are known for sure. And this is how the books of Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers all came into being. They were written during this period. Yes, ma'am. Are you waving your hand?
I wanted to say, I thought that the Torah had been given by Moses. So where do I have that wrong?
The original law I mean, the line is Moses gave the law, and what is in the Torah is the law. But what I'm telling you is the actual writing down in a written form where people said, yeah, I think that's what happened. That didn't happen until about 800 BCE. It happened after David, after the Babylonians. It didn't happen 2,000 years ago or 2,000 years before. It's not that ancient. It's very surprising how not ancient the Old Testament Bible is. Okay, so let's see where I was. Okay. So while these guys are writing down the law, weeping by the lakes of Babylon, what happens to Babylon? It gets conquered by the Persians. So the Persians come in and they take a look around at this place by the lake where everybody's weeping. So what's this? And they say, oh, these are the Judeans. We brought them here as slaves. Persians say, slaves? You don't want slaves. You want taxpayers. You want people to pay you money. What are you going to do with 40,000 slaves? They eat too much. Send them back. So they decided to send the Judeans back to Jerusalem. And they also realized, they're not going to be happy without a temple. So let's fund giving them a temple. We'll give them a temple. We'll give them money for a temple. We'll give them money to rebuild what the Babylonians took down. Then we'll be their best friends, and they'll take care, and we'll work together. It's nice. Persians had a very generous idea about how to handle other cultures. So here we are. They're going back, and the Persians are sending over their magi. The magi were the wise people, the wise Zoroastrians. They were followers of the Persian religion. And they're coming back, and the Persians are saying, well, what do we got to do? What do you need? This, that, the other. And they discuss their mutual religions and come to find out that aspects of the Persian religion were very attractive to the Jews. One of the things that they discussed was the afterlife. Well, what happens when you die? Oh, you're hanging around someplace with a bunch of mist and it's ugly. And so, oh, that's not exactly what we believe. We believe that you're in the ground until a resurrection happens. And you come back out of the ground in your body. And the Jews went, that's a concept. And he said, well, what happens then? He said, in your religion, is there no certain consequences of your action? Go, no, that happens while you're alive. So not in our religion. Not in our religion. We think there's going to be a judgment. We think God's going to come down, raise everybody up from the dead, look at them and decide which ones get to go to the good place and which ones get to go to the bad place for eternity. Jews are going, whew, what a concept. That's great. How does that happen? He said, well, we also believe that there's going to be like a living embodiment, a human form of God who's going to come in and have a big battle, and everybody's going to die in the battle, and that's how they're going to get resurrected, and we'll finally figure out which ones are good. And those will get raised up to heaven, the other ones won't, and there'll be eternal joy and happiness in heaven for the good people, and horrible consequences of hell for the bad. The Jews go, what a concept this is. Holy cow. And it fits right in line. And they would, having just gotten done looking at their books of lore and translating them into Hebrew, they found little remnants of things that had been said and written down that sort of fell in line with these ideas. They recognized the similarity of the Persian religion with their own. And at that point, the group broke into two groups. There was a group that said, listen, we're the priests. We don't believe this shit. We're not going for that. Our religion says you die, you go to nothing. There's no heaven, no hell, no nothing like that. And then there was other group who said, well, we kind of don't think that way. And that group that was the strict version of the law, the strict version of the lore, called themselves the Zadoks, naming themselves after the first high priest at the time of Solomon's temple, who was called Zadok. And so they called themselves the Zadoks. And the other group became known as the Pharisees, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees. So when Jesus comes around a 1,000 years after this, he's actually meeting Sadducees and Pharisees who have been affected by the Persian religion, either saying we don't want it any part of us or we do want it part of us. So I don't know if anybody went to Sunday school and they said, here's Jesus talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and say, hey, that's great. Have a nice talk, Jesus. And then you'd hear these strange little stories. Uh, a bunch of priests came to Jesus and said a man had a wife, and then he died, and the law said that the wife had to marry the man's brother. So she did, and then that one died. And then she married the next brother, and that one died. And the next one died. And now, according to this, they would what? All go to heaven and all be married to each other? How is that going to work? And this was the Sadducees trying to prove how inane the Pharisee ideas were, how inane it was to say there would be some sort of heaven where everybody would go. How would you figure it out? Who was married to whom? It was just crazy. It's sort of the equivalent of the dorm thing. Well, can God make a rock so heavy he can't lift it? It's just like, yeah, no, you don't ask that question. And that's what Jesus says is unask the question. Just stop asking. That's dopey. You're just ignoring the reality. But the Pharisees and Sadducees started during the end of the Babylonian captivity and the return to Jerusalem. So the slave population, the Babylonian captives, returned to Judea, and they were led by fierce Levite prophets who were demanding tremendous restrictions on everybody. They kicked out everybody who had married a foreigner in Judea. If you had married a foreigner during the 40 years of the captivity, gone. Just kick him the hell out. Get yourself a different spouse. They literally did that. It's like ice coming in and just getting rid of the people they didn't want around. And a lot of these spouses had gone through conversion rituals and conversion ceremonies. Men had gotten circumcised and things like that. They were seriously trying to obey the basic ideas of being a Jew, but here comes Ezra and what's the other guy's name? And they just kicked everybody out. They were horrible. They were fierce about the law. Now, about this time, just as they were coming back in, just as the Persians were funding some of the reconstruction of Jerusalem, funding the temple, they'd been building it. Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls and the temple, and it was a crappy temple compared to the old temple, but it was still a kind of a temple. And one of the things is, what are we going to do about the fire? That fire we were supposed to have lit all the time. The fire went out. Oh my God, the fire went out. The fire went out. You were supposed to keep it lit underneath the sacrificial altar, and it went out. So what are we going to do? And the Persian said, well, we got these big cans of something that we found when we were looking for Jeremiah's stuff. And we think if you open these cans up, fire comes out. And these cans are like 100 years old, but if you open them up, fire comes out. It was called naphtha. It was the fires that Jeremiah had stored from the altar fires before the destruction of Jerusalem, and he'd stored them and they remained lit. So they relit the altar fires, the sacrificial fires under the altar where you did the sacrifice and smoke went to heaven, with the naphtha that had been saved by Jeremiah. But they never found the ark. So they built this little area inside the temple with the claws and everything. And they just left the foundation stone there. And they started to do the routines of the Yom Kippur ceremony and going in and taking a look. Well, there was nothing there. There was no smoke or clouds that showed the face of God, but they'd sprinkle a little of the goat blood onto the foundation stone and say, well, that's probably good enough for us to all be forgiven now. Our sins are all That's the end. That's fine. That's absolution. You good so far? You got a temple where rites of sacrifice are pretending to be like the actual rites of sacrifice that happen at the real temple. And now you're being asked to believe that you should be obeying the laws and handing tithes over to the priesthood for taking care of all the stuff you're supposed to be taking care of in this artificial look-alike temple that hasn't got half the stuff in it that it's supposed to have. But if you don't, then you're going to end up sick, poor, and dead. So hand it over. Hand over the tithes. Good so far? All right. So one of the things that the Levite priesthood did, among other things, I'll just mention this here, is when people brought up the idea, like, hey, maybe this isn't exactly right, they actually made an edict, the end of prophecy. These prophets were people in Judea who would get around and say, hey, you know, another thing that's wrong? I'll tell you another thing that's wrong. This has got to change. And they'd make a big stink about things that they didn't like. And they were allowed to, and they were listened to, and they were given a voice. So all the prophets that you read about in the Bible originally just started off being basically trollers on Twitter and making an effect on the lives of the oligarchs who were doing the business. And so this group of Levites said, no, there are no more prophets. The end of prophecy is in place. There are no more prophets. You hear somebody prophesying, they're just a pain in the ass. Let's get rid of them. End of prophecy. The Persians got conquered by Alexander the Great. And so for a while, Jerusalem was under the control of both the Persians and Alexander the Great in control of the Persians. And then Alexander the Great died soon after that, and he divided up the giant kingdom of the world that he had conquered into pieces, and there were two pieces that affected Jerusalem. Jerusalem was right at the borderline between a northern kingdom called the Seleucids and a southern kingdom called the Ptolemies. Ptolemies are the family of Cleopatra. And it was at this point that the Levite priesthood came up with a pretty interesting idea. They went to the family that was in charge was the family of the Oniads. Everybody in this family of priests was called Onias. So this became known as the Oniad priesthood. And they went to first the Ptolemies, who were in charge, and they said, hey, what are you going to do about taxes? And they said, oh, we're going to send a bunch of guys and figure out how to get all money from you guys. And the priest, the Oniad, said, hey, wait a minute. You know, we're running around once a year collecting tithes. We can collect taxes for you. So they set up something called tax farming, where this group, the Oniads, how am I doing on time? Oh, Christ, I'm late. The Oniads were collecting money from the Jews, both for their religious purposes, the tithes, and also the taxes that were to be paid. So these same people, the local priests, were running around collecting tons of money. The average human being at this time got to keep roughly 40% of his earnings. So this is tough on everybody, and it kept getting tougher because the people who had set the valuation on which you had to pay taxes and tithes were the same priests who were collecting it. And it was just the potential for corruption was just huge, just gigantic. And that's what was happening for about 60, 70 years. And then the northern kingdom, the Seleucids, managed to conquer the Ptolemies, which, by the way, didn't happen in Judea. The battles were all kept outside of Judea because nobody wanted to hurt the tax base that was making so much to the Ptolemies, so that they just ran around. The Ptolemies got slammed by the Seleucids. The Seleucids took over, and they said, yeah, let's just keep that tax farming thing going. That's a pretty cool deal. That's really good. So the Seleucids kept doing that. Now let's talk about the diaspora. Oh God, how long do I have? Am I out of time? Anybody want to go home? Raise your hand if you want to go home.
Oh, no, no, there's plenty of time, Jay. I mean, I just want to be sure. Do you need to drink water now and then? I worry about you are putting forth so
Our
prodigiously. All right.
our cabin was really overwarm, and I lost all the moisture in my throat. So
Can I ask you,
I'll
can
try
I
to
ask a,
make this I'll try to make this fast.
Oh,
Er,
can I, make,
There's,
can
there's,
I ask a question?
hmm.
Jay,
Cheryl,
yeah. Oh, how is it that the Levite tribe got in charge of all of this? I think you said it in the beginning, but I forgot pretty quickly.
I have
Why
that
were the
question.
Levites picked as the overrulers of everybody else?
Right. I have that same
that was
question.
God's choice. The Levites were the descendants of Aaron, who was the guy who led who took over from Moses at Moses's appointment, appointed Aaron to take over. Aaron was the guy who
Right.
took him into Canaan, and was the father or grandfather of Joshua, who knocked down the walls of Jericho and all like that. They were the leadership tribe.
Hmm. Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks, Cheryl. I had that same question. How did this? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
thanks. Thanks.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, when people get tired of listening, just tell me. Well,
No,
thank you.
No,
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 we,
no, we're not.
nothing's coming up. Nothing's coming up soon.
plenty of
Oh,
time.
okay.
Feel
Good.
free.
All right. So let's go back and try and figure out what's going on here. Uh, One of the things that's going on is that the stories about let's talk about the diaspora. When the Babylonians came in and took over and took slaves, a lot of people didn't go with them. They ran away. And they ran away out of Judea all over places all around the Levant. So there were these small groups, these small enclaves that had showed up various places, and they were fairly successful in those places. And they were called the diaspora, the dispersed ones. And one of the things that the diaspora did, the Levites made darn sure that they were getting tithes from them. So they'd send people to these places saying, you owe us a tithe. How are you doing? Give us 20%. So there was a constant communication back and forth with the diaspora and money flowing back and forth. And one of the interesting aspects of this is that money flowing back and forth went to the temple, and people in Judea and in the temple itself said, this could be handy. They actually set up the temple as a kind of a bank with branches. And you could transfer money in and out of what you were sending to the temple by writing a wax tablet, a seal on a wax tablet saying, give this guy my 50 shekels. And it didn't have to be carried back and forth. All you needed was the wax tablet, and the transfer happened on paper. It was a checking account system, which is pretty interesting. Now, what was going in as tithes was not money mostly. Mostly it was agricultural goods. The wealth of Judea was in olive oil, olives, grain, lots of grain. And what the Seleucids were mainly interested was in the grain. They wanted the grain. So how that worked was they set up large granaries near farming areas of Judea. And when the taxes were due, they would take grain and put them into a granary, and then later on the Seleucids would come and take it out of the granary. So mainly what was being transferred back and forth was grain or little wax tablets that said, now you've got X number shekels worth of grain that you can use. So you move stuff around like this, okay? However, the temple itself was another kind of site. It was a site of worship, and people would hand things over to the temple just for pure worship purposes. Oh, here's my grandmother's necklace. Oh, here's this ring. Oh, here's this, here's that. So the temple was actually getting a lot of valuable stuff, jewels, gold, things like that. But the main wealth of the temple was in grain. And they set up selling grain, their tithes of grain. The Levites would sell their tithes of grain to other countries. They'd move them to shipping ports. There was a hell of a lot of stuff moving around in terms of wealth. Not all the wealth was in terms of gold, liquid, something you could easily move around. A lot of it was in terms of grain. I'm saying this because we have to frame the Seleucids' understanding of what they were seeing. Because Seleucus III, one of the fourth or fifth rulers of the Seleucid kingdom, was realizing he wanted more money so he could go and beat people up with it. He wanted better funded armies. And what he discovered was that a number of the temples in his area had a lot of stuff that he could steal that was mostly in the form of gold and jewels and things that had been given out of worship. He said, well, wait a minute, what about Jerusalem? That place is like, that temple must be jamming with stuff. For one thing, people were going to Jerusalem to live there, to buy tombs there, because there was this mythology that when the Last Judgment came and the resurrection came, that was where it was going to happen. And if you wanted to be where it was happening, if you wanted to make sure your body rose from the dead and you had a shot at going to heaven, you wanted to be right in the middle of it. So they were selling tombs to what I call resurrection tourists who were fairly rich and able to just come down there. There was a lot of money going back and forth from Judea to the diaspora. There was all this stuff, and the Seleucids became aware about the amount of wealth that might actually be sitting in the temple. Just like they were raiding other temples to other gods, Persian gods, and other gods of the area where there was wealth, Seleucus was trying to steal that money from those temples and use them for his armies. And he sent a big raid to a temple in the eastern part of Persia, and it went there, and somehow or other it all fell apart and nothing happened. And he had already kind of spent the money that he thought he was going to get, and he didn't know what to do. And he said, I'm going to send people to Jerusalem to ransack that temple. I'll bet there's a lot of money there. And this is when things get interesting. So he sent a bunch of people to the temple, including his number one general, a guy named Heliodorus. Seleucid sent Heliodorus to the temple, said, get everything. Heliodorus took 40 ox carts to take all the wealth of the temple. And when he got there, he was all set. The Jews knew he was coming. They set up resistance. It fell apart. Heliodorus and the 40 ox carts move right into the courtyard. They look right at the high priest. Everything's gonna be nasty. And suddenly, out of the tabernacle, the stone tabernacle at the center of the temple, the place where the Ark of the Covenant wasn't, the doors fly open, and two angels with swords come out. Swords start to flame. And Heliodorus isn't having any of it. He pulls out his sword and he starts to march up the steps. He's going to kill and gut these damned angels. And a giant rider angel on a horse comes and runs him over. And he falls down on the ground. And he says, "That's it." And he jumps into his chariot or whatever he's doing, his horse. He charges back to Antioch, where Seleucus III is king. He runs up, and Seleucus is just about to say, "How'd it go?" when Herodias comes in, stabs him, and throws him to the ground and says, "I'm going to be the king now."
Whoa.
So now there's a lot of palace intrigue in Antioch. And over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, a successor, a brother of Seleucus, is found. He had been sent to Rome as a hostage. Rome is starting to be a player in the Mideast at this time. And so they sent this guy to Rome as a hostage, saying, "We're not going to bother you. You don't bother us. Here's a guy you can kill if you think we're bothering you." So he was sent as a hostage to Rome. He learned Roman ways. He went to Roman schools, things like that. Now, remember that at this point, everything has been affected by the impact of Alexander. Greek is now a very common language throughout. The language everybody speaks is Aramaic, but the official stuff is all written in Greek. Aramaic is what you talk to your buddy in, but then if you got something important to say, you say it in Greek. And all the people who wanted to be more important during this period, this flux period, started adopting Greek names. They started adopting Greek names. I forget what the name of Onias's close guy for taking care of the temple. He was like the master of the temple. He changed his name from something like just something or other to Jason. So the next guy to show up here is Antiochus and Jason. These are how things start going. Antiochus is the new titular king of the Seleucid Empire. Jason is the guy in charge. Onias is the high priest. He's actually the official guy in charge, but all the business of this is being done through Jason. And Jason goes to Antioch and talks to Antiochus and says, "Hey, you know this these taxes we send you and everything?" He says, "How'd you like an extra 700 talents of silver a year?" 700 talents. That's 70 pounds times 700. What does that work out to? 4,900 pounds of silver. That's a Mercedes-Benz worth of silver. And he's sending, he and Jason and Antiochus work out that they're going to send these huge pellets of silver. And one of the things about paying money to the Seleucids, it had all been done with granaries. He said, "Oh, I sent my money to the granary." Now, suddenly, with this event, Jason is saying, "I'm going to do this. I'm going to send you 4,900,000. Somebody's got to work out the decimals. I'm going to send you 7,000. Yeah, I think it's close. Anyway, it's a lot. I'm going to send you all this silver every year if you make me the high priest." So Jason sends a small army down to Jerusalem, marches into the Jerusio, which is the sort of the Congress of the priesthood, during a meeting, and says, "Hey, you know that high priest you got, Onias? He's out. Jason's in. Tell me if you don't like it." And they're going, "Oh, it's fine with us. Sure, whatever you say. You got the guys holding swords to our necks. So yeah, welcome new high priest Jason." So Jason is sending all this money very visibly, unlike the sort of invisible motion of the grain, actual silver going down the street on ox carts and people watching it leaving town and going someplace else. They have a very different opinion of Jason at this point. And Jason is saying, hey, you know what we could use? Because let's be more Greek. That'll make us more popular. Let's put a gymnasium in the temple courtyard. A big gymnasium. The gymnasium was a place of not just getting strong and getting bathed and taking baths, but it was also where a lot of discussions got done. And it opened up Greek culture to more and more of the Jews. And while they're doing it, they said, here's Antiochus. He says, hey, you know what else you could use? You know what you need? You need a big statue of Zeus. That would be just the thing to stick right next to the tabernacle. So they sent down a big statue of Zeus, and just so happens that the statue was designed to look exactly like Antiochus. So they have this big statue of Zeus sitting in the temple and the gymnasium gets so popular with the priests who were just sitting there, mostly just cutting the necks of sheep and cutting them up before they're thrown. So they said, hey, you know what? Let's go to the gymnasium for a while. And they stopped doing their daily duties so they could pop off the gymnasium and get a bath in olive oil and stuff like that. This was the new life of the temple. And it was not a very popular life, and a lot of people got upset and angry. And it also got of interest to Jason. I told you Ananias, the high priest, had Jason as his buddy. Jason became high priest thanks to Antiochus. And he put another guy in charge of temple activities, a guy named Menelaus. And Menelaus does this for a couple of years. So let me see. Jason goes to Antiochus and makes a deal, and he gets to be high priest, given 700 talents of silver. What would happen if I went to Antiochus and offered 700 talents of gold? Well, come to find out, that'll buy you the priesthood faster than anything. And so the next thing these Jews see is ox carts filled with talents of gold rolling up to Antiochus. And they're going, I don't like this. I didn't know there was this much money lying around. Menelaus is actually taking the jewels and golds and worship trophies that have been given to the temple that are not just tithes and taxes, but actual gifts. And he's taking those and sending them up as well. So he's no longer feeling his popularity. However, Antiochus is getting pretty well off, and he decides that what he needs to do with all this money is invade the Ptolemies in Egypt. So he decides to raise a giant army and walk through Jerusalem in triumph to thank them for their nice gifts that they've been giving so voluntarily to the Seleucids. For the benefit of the Seleucids, he walks through, and Menelaus actually raises big parades, Palm Sunday type things where they're bowing down and waving palms at Antiochus. And he's arranging it that everybody yells, "Go Antiochus," as they walks through. And Antiochus is feeling really good. And he walks and they march their army through, and they march all the way down to Egypt. And when they get to Egypt, in front of them is a lone Roman general on a horse. And they ride up to this general. He looks very important, and they stop. And he says, "Where are you going?" He goes, "Oh, we're going to go invade the Ptolemies." He says, "You invade the Ptolemies, we're their allies now. You'll be fighting us too." And Antiochus, I don't care. I'm tough. Look at my army. And this one general gets off his horse and he says, you got to think about this. And he draws a line in the sand. He says, don't step over this line unless you've made a firm decision. So Antiochus actually stands and looks at the line for like 4 or 5 hours before he says, I'm turning back. And he turns back. And that's the line in the sand. That is the origin of the word line in the sand. You've probably heard that used as a phrase. I've drawn a line in the sand. Well, that's the line in the sand. And Antiochus started going back. Now, rumors of this event started to fly as fast as possible to Jerusalem. And you know how rumors are a little bit off and things like that. And you also probably aren't conscious of the idea that they don't move any faster than the army does much. There's no way to get to Jerusalem faster, if they have a bird maybe or a fast rider. But the amount of time between the event and the arrival of the news is going to be pretty compact. So what Jerusalem heard was that Antiochus had been killed. And they went nuts with happiness. They started jumping up and down, having a great time, throwing out confetti and streamers and everything, fireworks. I'm making that up. But Antiochus comes into Jerusalem and sees everybody celebrating that he died. And he's not happy to see these celebrations. So he starts killing everybody he can find in Jerusalem. He just starts going, massacring anybody that he can find. And he says to himself, he goes back to Antioch and says, the problem is Jews. We either got to kill them or we got to have them stop being Jews. So he begins to destroy the basis, as he sees it, of Judaism. He starts killing circumcised babies by hanging them around the necks of their mothers and throwing the mothers off the battlements of the temple. He starts forcing people to eat pork. And if you don't eat pork, he kills you. And I call this the pork test. And the pork test plays a line in here. They started sending these Seleucid troops out into the hinterlands. In Jerusalem, they were burning Torahs right and left. People were eating pork as fast as possible. And Antiochus is saying, it's not enough. It's not enough. We got to go out into the countryside. That's where the people who are paying our taxes live. We're going to make sure everybody knows we're in charge and this has got to end. So he sends his troops out into the countryside. They go from town to town, feeding people pork to prove that you are now no longer Jews. You have to stand up and eat the pork and say, I give up being a Jew. And when he gets to a town called Modayin, he runs into a guy named Mattathias, who is the local priest, Levite of that area. And they bring him out, the local honcho, to watch his people eating pork, so that he knows that these are now apostates. These are no longer Jews. And he brings them, has to watch, they bring out a guy, they bring out some old guy. And the gag was, and they tell the old guy this, here, just eat this. This is a piece of chicken. They don't know the difference. Just eat this chicken. Say it's pork, say you give up. Who's going to know? And the old guy wouldn't do it. He refused to cheat. And Mattathias is watching this, and as he watches, he refuses to cheat. One of the guards just says just kills the old guy right in front of him. And Mattathias takes out a club and beats the soldier to death. and the rest of the crowd start beating up the other Seleucid soldiers. And that's when Mattathias it's turned into a crowd. He says, anyone who still believes in the law and loves the Lord, follow me. And he walks everybody into the hills, away from where the soldiers are, into the very difficult terrain. And more people gather with the crowd and go. And over the course of the next few weeks, many people are going into the hills to try and rebel against the Seleucids. Now, the Seleucids figured something out. They knew that they would get raided and banged up and down by these rebellious farmers who were trying to make a fuss. They were an organized army. They didn't, why even bother to fight them? They're not doing much harm. So they would let these Jews go. And on the Sabbath, the Jews would hide in a cave because they weren't allowed to do this kind of stuff on a Sabbath day. And so the Seleucids had this bright idea. Let's find the cave and burn everybody at once, which they did. They would kill hundreds of people in caves on a typical Sabbath. And the Jews would just sit there and take it. And finally, Mattathias says, what good is the Sabbath if there's no one left to obey it, appreciate it? So slowly, the Jews started to fight back. And this is the rebellion, but this is not the point of Hanukkah. The rebellion, they kind of won. They actually wore down the Seleucids, and eventually the Seleucids just more or less gave up and said, okay, take over Jerusalem. It's yours, fine. When the rebels actually got to Jerusalem and looked at the temple, they saw that it hadn't just been left it had been desecrated. They'd poured pig shit on everything, literally. They'd taken pig's blood and covered the walls and covered the altars. There was something on the altar that is only named and never described, and the fact that it's never described, I think, is wonderful. It is the abomination of desolation. They came in, and it was such a horrible thing. Whatever the hell it was, it made people weep to look at it. And they eventually took it out of the place where the ark had been, and they got rid of it. The stones had been so desecrated with pig's blood and pig shit that they took whole parts of the tabernacle apart, and they put the stones in a place, saying one of these days a prophet will tell us what to do with these stones because we don't know what to do with it. And they rebuilt as much as possible the temple back to its previous form. And this is the part to me. How empty is this temple? How many steps removed is this rebuilt temple from the previous temple? How many steps removed from the temple of David and Solomon? How many steps removed from the tabernacle tent? There is nothing. There's not even the Babylonian naphtha fire. There is nothing. It's not the same stones. It's not the same place. It's not the same stuff. It's an empty copy. And the part that gets to me is that they stood on the mountain nearby looking at this temple, and they said, we want to start it up again. We want to worship again. We're going to do what we can to worship again. And so they decided to set up worship in the temple once more. Now, I think I mentioned the menorah, and this is how the lights come. One of the things that was in the temple tabernacle was a a large candlestick, and you were supposed to light flames and keep them lit all the time. And the oil for those flames had to be a special kind, beaten olive oil. And they noticed when they were rebuilding the temple, there was a whole little store of beaten olive oil. They said, okay, good. If we do it again, we got some oil, we can get this thing going. Beaten olive oil took a while to do. You had to do it in a special way. It took days to make it happen. Good, we've got some. So they decided to restart the temple. They had a kind of a festival, a lot of people there. And that's when they discovered that the beaten oil that was needed had all been unsealed and desecrated and had no longer any assurance of purity. They found one amphora of sealed oil. And they had to then make another decision. Is it even the hell worth it? I don't know if any of you have done 12 steps, but I've done 12 steps. And one of the things is when you face how much of a mess you made of your life, you wonder if it's even worth it to try. And they decided to try. If we can't do it, we'll just do it one day. We'll do the one day. And they knew that because of the huge impurities involved in trying to reconstruct this temple, that it had no way that God would accept it with all its impurities. It went against every Levite law in town. And it just said, we'll do it the best we can. We will worship the best we can. Just this day. And that's when they tried. And that's when God, to me, gave him the sign by showing them that he would pay attention to their intent, not to their specific actions. He would bless their intent. He would forgive. He opened up forgiveness as a new type of presence, not the God of consequences, the God of forgiveness that was looking at intent and desire to do right. And that's the change. That's the change in God that happened from the faith of these people. That is why Hanukkah is celebrated, in my view. It becomes the start of the priesthood begins to fall apart soon after this. The rabbis who have been taking love of the Torah as a book, love of prayer, out to the countryside, to the diaspora, become the important figures in Jewish religion. And so that's the point at which learning and love of God become consequential. And it isn't just blind obedience to a stupid set of rules. That's when the corrupt priesthood is kicked out and the rabbis begin to take over. I think I'm over 2.5 hours now. No, I still have another 12 minutes to get to 2 hours. Okay, I'm just going to stop. Excuse me. This is very emotional for me. I'll take questions or go away.
Tell us about Judas Maccabee. That I never quite how to tell us about him, especially you.
Oh,
You
I should point out something. Why the rabbis don't know anything about this, why the Jewish people don't know anything about this, is this is all written in basically two books, two types of histories. There's the so-called apocrypha of the books of Maccabees, which are not in any standard Bible in a Christian church unless you go to a Catholic church or a Lutheran church. They have the books of Maccabees in the Bible. The Jews don't have these books in their Bibles. They don't exist. You ask a rabbi about it, they don't know what the hell you're talking about. Josephus, the main chronicler of the Jewish history for the Romans, about 110 years after this, writes about this and writes about the stuff. Judas was the son of Mattathias. He had no particular skills in anything, but somehow or other he was an organizer, and he organized some kind of resistance. The actual remnants, the actual histories of these battles that he had, there's only one battle that's clearly defined where he staged what appeared to be a retreat and was actually a feint that had the Seleucids come into the place that he had supposedly retreated from, and he'd had other people around the outsides of that area, and they came in and killed a bunch of Seleucids. And it didn't apparently take that much to make the Seleucids say, "What's the point?" The temple had been ransacked and everything been taken out of it. It was just a bunch of stones with pig shit on it, and they just said, "Fine, keep it." So unlike all the wonderful other heroic stories of David and whatnot, Saul in the Bible, this was kind of an anticlimax, no big battle to celebrate. They say it's a celebration of the battle. The closest thing is this one battle that I just described. That's about it. And it wasn't much of a battle. The Seleucids just decided it wasn't worth the money to do the fighting, which is kind of odd when you think about it.
What about Judas? Why do you see him as the minor incarnation? What about him? What are his qualities that were so
Well,
to you?
he is the titular hero. Uh, the Maccabees is Greek for hammer. He was known as Judas the Hammer. He set the name of the dynasty that followed as the Maccabees. So he did something, but his exact role isn't well defined anywhere. He's just the son, and he leads the battles, and there's like 3 or 4 one paragraph descriptions of, and then he went to this valley, and then he came out of that valley, went to this other valley, and then he sat in the hills, and that's about it. There's no real description of his personality, his battles, or anything like that. But the fact that all this happened ostensibly because of the revolt that was then named the Maccabean Revolt because of some guy named Judas Maccabee makes me think that's a big deal. So without a lot, that was, I don't know how to say it. I got into this knowing nothing. Now I know way more than I needed to know, but I don't know anything about Judas Maccabee other than basically his name and his role, and not actually how he detailed it and did it. Sorry. No, I'm actually realizing more and more like I'm making stuff up because I want to tell the story, so I have to imagine it. But I don't want to imagine it today here as if it's historical. Do you see what I'm saying? You can do your own imagining on this. What do you think? Who else was changing the world at that point? How else was changing the world that Jesus was born into? I made that assumption knowing nothing about Judas. The more I learn about him, the less I know, and I still assumed that that was a critical thing. That the revolution itself was what changed and laid the groundwork. Jesus was born into that groundwork. Jesus was born into a world full of rabbis and Pharisees, as well as and to a temple that was still rife with corruption. The You can't kill a corrupt system that just keeps coming back. Look at the U.S. You heard of the golden age and all the stuff they did to get rid of the oligarchs. That was 100 years ago. What do we see now? Exactly the same thing reemerging. It's just ecology. The ecology of the oligarchy keeps reappearing. So it reappeared again when Jesus was kicking over the money changers in the temple. That was the reappearance of the oligarchy. I'm not doing a great job here.
No, it's obvious that the revolution that you're talking, it was a great turning point, but the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I got out of this mostly was, I don't know how to put this. I see these incarnations of God as being generations of God. How does the nature of God change incarnation to incarnation? What does he do different incarnation to incarnation? How did God change from the God of the Jews who just wanted to make everybody miserable unless they obeyed, into the God of Jesus that was saying, love one another, treat them like I would treat you, things like that? That's a forgiving God. That's the thing that I check. How did that happen? How did the embracing incarnation of Meher Baba leave behind the strict Islamic culture that was coming out of the Mughals? That's what I would say, is like you see the change of the incarnation, change personality of God. That's what you got to look for, or that's what I look for. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, you're so kind. Oh my gosh.
So I have a question, Jay.
Yeah.
It's something I think about when I say the prayers over the Hanukkah lights. There are different ways. I have a sheet here. I learned it one way, and this is another way to say it. And there are two prayers. The first is, well, there are three, but I'd like to read the first one and ask you about it. It says, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah light." And I find it very interesting that the Lord commands us to kindle the Hanukkah light.
I can't find the command.
Yeah, like I wonder where that came from.
It's in the Talmud, which is the Talmud is a collection of the do's and don'ts as reestablished by the rabbinical leadership.
Mhm.
So while there is no specific command, there's not even a specific reference to the lights in any contemporary account of the Hanukkah. That began to emerge very quickly within the next 40, 50 years. Lighting Hanukkah lights became a standard thing among Jews.
Mhm.
And then in the Talmud, they discuss what do you got to do? Is it right? How many candles do you need? Do you light all of them and take one out at a time, or do you light none of them and light them one at a time? Do you got to use oil? Can you use wax? Blah 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 blah. It goes on and on. There's a whole Hanukkah section of the Talmud, and so at some point, couple 300-400 years after the event, this got put into became a standard.
Oh, and we do it, and God said so because they said God said so.
Yeah, yeah. But it was, don't forget, death of prophecy. There is no prophet accepted after I think Zechariah. So these are the commands of God came through prophets. And there was no prophet at this time.
Okay. Well,
so I'm confused just like you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the next one says, blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who performed miracles for our forefathers in those days at this time. So that explanation is a little different from yours. It's all just a miracle. Right?
What?
It says, who performed miracles for our forefathers. And I'm wondering if that has to do with the oil or.
No, I think when I read that one, my take is, there were all these other miracles. There was a miracle of the sun standing still. There's all these previous Old Testament miracles. Here's another one.
Okay, so all the miracles.
The Hanukkah miracle is just another indication that miracles happen out of the grace of God. And so we are now acknowledging that this miracle happened.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
that's my interpretation. You're more Jewish than me. What do you think?
I don't know. No, you're more Jewish than me. You know more stuff. But you remind me that first you have what happened, and then I don't know anything, but the Talmud is it's like Mandali talk. I mean, it's not even Mandali talk. It's just like what those who have studied the Torah, how it's the interpretation. It's all these interpretations and arguments, and they can cough up all kinds of stuff. And there you are. Yeah.
I'm I imagine us, when I read the Talmud, I imagine sitting in Mandali Hall in 300 years and a bunch of guys spitballing and arguing with each other.
Yeah, really.
And they will.
Yeah, they're already doing it.
Jay, I don't know if you can hear me or not. I'm having trouble with my phone. Okay, Cheryl. 2 questions. Well, one statement I want to make. I think that one of the miracles, Diane, that you asked, to me would immediately, and I was not brought up Jewish. I went to church, Christian church, and interdenominational church. So we accepted any religion to come to us, which was great. I loved growing up that way. But I would think manna from heaven would be one of the past miracles.
Oh, and yeah. How about the Red Sea? How about manna from heaven? All that stuff. How about all the frogs and the toads and the plagues and the killing of the firstborn? There's a few.
Yeah, I just think of those things. And also about love beginning to take precedent over rules and regulations. You said, and I'm asking you to make a connection for me that I don't know enough about, and you might be able to help, Jay, or anyone else, is when they looked down from, I guess, the temple, where the Temple Mount had been, and looked down, and they said, this is just too unpurified. That's not the word I want, but that's what's coming up.
There is a specific passage in the book of Maccabees. So this is a documented event that they put on sackcloth and ashes and went up to the mountain that overlooks the temple and said, what do we do now?
Right. That's what I'm referring to. You brought it up.
And they spent a couple of days kicking it around, and their decision was to try and repurify and rededicate the temple.
But the word you used during the time you were talking about that, you also brought up love.
Yeah.
So, because you were asking us and asking yourself, how did this God of retribution become the God of love that Jesus
Yeah.
embodied? So I'm
Yeah.
wondering from the people themselves changing heart and seeing the massive amount of destruction on every level, in terms of people, in terms of their temple, in terms of the wealth that was gone, the destruction really of everything. Did they themselves from their heart? I mean, it's a question. I don't know if you've read anything, so I'm wondering about that. And also how after this point, when they're looking down from the top of the mountain and realizing the destruction, that they have to purify it again so they can begin again with true, I'm assuming some sense of true worship of God. Did Jesus come? How much after that time period did
That was 100 and some 150, 180 years later Jesus shows up.
so quite a while.
Yes, and the
3 generations at least.
entire political landscape changed along that time. That's when Romans came in. That's when Herod took the temple apart and rebuilt it in this magnificent Roman fashion, expanding it beyond belief. One of the problems that you have for me as a historian trying to say, well, what the temple looked like, everybody tells you what Herod's temple looked like. It is very well documented. It's extreme, it's gigantic, and it has nothing to do with either David's original temple or the much smaller version of this temple. I do research using Chat GPT to help me find sources, and it's constantly saying, "Oh, the temple was this big and was here, and the colonnades were here." And I have to write and say, "I don't want Herod's temple. Don't tell me about Herod's temple." And he goes, "Oh, okay. Well, there were no colonnades, or there may have been, but there's no documentation of the colonnades. There's no documentations of the stone size. The stone size used in Herod's temple was a huge amount. I mean, just I don't know how to put it. Stones that were 40 feet long, 5 to 8 feet high, and 4 to 5 feet wide were being used to put into Herod's temple, which was 150 years later. And the actual stones that still remain from the first and second temple, the first temple, David's temple, the second temple, Judas's temple, are about a quarter of that size. So there was a lot of difference between what Herod built and what had originally been built. And they can document the different times and sizes of the stones. But when you see these reconstructions of Herod's temple, which is all you ever see when you look at a picture, show me the temple of Jesus's time. Gigunda. It's not like what it was like. So you got to imagine. Am I okay saying that? And about love,
I don't know, because I'm not part of that whole tradition of learning about my past being Jewish. So I don't know, because I wasn't. I mean, I feel that I was, and I think we all probably were with all the traditions we have had. You know, I've been told that I was by somebody who's
so Cheryl,
yeah.
The distinction that I would say is fairly well documented is the distinction between Levitical Judaism of law as the primary impetus for Judaism and rabbinical Judaism, which had learning and worship much more like was found in David and David's time. The more of the Psalms, more of trying to be a worthy servant, not trying to figure out what the law really is and how to obey the law, but rather how to appreciate and be a better human being within within your life, trying to worship God. Rabbinical Judaism is the Judaism that's today's Judaism, and it changed uh, when the Romans destroyed Herod's temple, which was 70 years after the death of Jesus.
Okay, thank you. And I would just like to make Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, if I can remember all of what you just said, I was
You can
thinking.
look it up.
Yeah. Okay. And the other thing I want to say is that I kind of, I guess, because I think of myself as being open, but in ways I get shown all the time how I'm not. But I've never really cared for the lighting of the Hanukkah candles. I think because the Jewish people I knew around me growing up in New York City, and there were many, made a such big deal of lighting the Hanukkah candles, but were quietly disapproving of all the Christmas stuff that some of us were doing. And now this has been helpful for me in realizing that for me, the lighting of the Hanukkah candles is lighting, if I were to be doing it, would be lighting my own love, my own desire to really love each time I lit a candle. And how I came to that was a previous thought just in the past few minutes of what happened? How did the transition from a punishing God to Jesus occur? And I think it's each person's choice to listen to the true teachings, which they certainly had, those people around Jesus at the time of Jesus. And because I've always wondered about, well, if Jesus came and said, and Baba says that because of Baba saying love alone prevails and love conquers all, then how in God's name, with Jesus's preaching about love, did he suffer so tremendously by being hung on the cross and nailed and whipped and crowned with thorns? I mean, if love overcomes everything, it certainly isn't evident to me in the history of what I've learned as a Christian. And now with Baba's teachings and doing a lot of reading with Scott McCaig on the Narina, Baba's messages through Narina, I'm really understanding more and more how Baba's words of I'm going to put it this way, these are my words, each one of us has to make the choice to really live the teachings of and I'm going to all of a sudden use the word prophet, Baba as the one who is here to enlarge our experience of what it is to be human and what it is to be one period, just one. All of us is one, which is the teaching of love.
Just to get back to your question, a couple of items I'll just bring up.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity developed after Jesus, just like Babaism is going to develop after Baba. But one of the things that you'll find in the early theologians who tried to understand Jesus's importance is they related it back to the Yom Kippur ceremony, or even before that to the saving of the Jews during the killing of the firstborn in Egypt, when they sacrificed a lamb and used the blood to mark out which people were the Jews. Don't kill the firstborns here. The Yom Kippur ceremony killed a goat, and the goat's blood was the blood of the sacrifice done on behalf of all the Jews. That was the part that got them redemption from their sins. Jesus is called the Lamb of God. He represents to early Christian theologians that a sacrifice is needed, and the sacrifice is no longer individual sheep or individual goats. The sacrifice is this one gift of God that was given to us. On behalf of everybody, Jesus is the sacrificial lamb. And that permeates the theology of Christianity within a couple hundred years, that sins can be forgiven without having to go through the temple and having burning pieces of sheep on an altar. There's a way that God forgives, and they use Jesus as the method of that, and you have to believe in Jesus and stuff like that. But what I see from the Hanukkah story is it's the personal decision, what you were talking about, the personal decision to ask for forgiveness, the personal decision to dedicate your life in a particular way. That changes things. So there's the story, there's the take you take from the story, and then there's the kind of codification of the story as it's distributed. And don't forget that just like the Jews were terrified of God's retribution, the way they promoted Christianity to the non-Christians at the time was to say, oh, you're going to be in big trouble and go to hell unless you follow Jesus. It's the same retribution threat that was the main driver of Christianity. The fear of long-term retribution of God is big fear. And if you emphasize it, you can manipulate a lot of people really fast.
Thank you for that connection. Thank you. That's really important for me to hear.
Okay.
This retribution stuff and I've experienced it from several people over the years.
Sure.
I'm going to burn in hell because I don't believe that the Bible is wholly God's word. That's
the Jews didn't believe you were going to burn in hell. They just believed that your family was going to be miserable, sick, and poor.
And you were going to die. And all of you are going to die and be in this misty under the ground state forever.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for all of this, really.
Yes, Betty. Turn on your mic, Betty.
Okay, thank you. You'd say that is it the Wailing Wall? Is that remnants of the original temple? Is that
No,
okay.
That's up for dispute. It appears to be from Herod's temple.
Oh.
Stones.
Okay.
Okay.
Which was the last of the temples to be destroyed. The Babylonians broke down the original Solomon's temple, and they left chunks of it lying around. They didn't clear the decks. Romans, oh my God, the Romans knew how to clear the decks. They didn't just break stuff down. They made sure there was nothing left. So when the Romans broke up Herod's temple, there was hardly anything left. And it would have been hard to take that particular wall down because it's high and hard to get to and heavy. And they left it up, but they didn't leave up much. So there's chunks of Herod's temple floating around. There's the Wailing Wall still floating around, but the pieces of the original temple are things that people find and say, hey, this isn't the same period of stone. This stone was cut differently. This looks like earlier period, things like that. The archaeologists are guessing about what the first two temples looked like.
Okay. Jay, this has been amazing. Boy, if you were a professor, I'd love a class once a week.
Oh my God, would I lose tenure fast?
No, I'd still be in college if you were my professor.
Totally. You were just I know you've looked into Shivaji, and I'm asking you now, oh, please come back and tell us that story.
Oh, look I'm getting hearts. Is that from Gail? Thank you, Gail.
Yeah. This has been 2 incredible hours. I'm so grateful for you to share it. My gosh, it's prodigious, the research you've done.
Yes, and may I say, please don't get into this or you'll end up having a brain like mine, and you don't want a brain like mine.
Well, I'm glad you're sharing a bit of it with us, Jay.
Well, let's go and
I don't know about you. We've been lighting Hanukkah the candle a night, every night on Archie. It's been.
Do you say any of the blessings?
Yes. Well, we sing the song. Gabby, the Jews in the group sing the song.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
The third prayer, Diana, the Shekianu prayer.
Yeah.
is one of my favorite things. You do it when it's an event, the first event of a year. So the first time you have cherries for dessert because the cherries are fresh, a Shekianu prayer gets said.
Oh, I didn't realize. Yeah, although it does say that at the beginning. Again, the guys who make decisions about how we should pray and stuff like
Yeah.
that. They say, yeah, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has granted us life, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this occasion. And it does explain that it's for it's only on the first night of Hanukkah. And oh, it just says it's on the first night of Hanukkah. I didn't realize it's for the first.
It is a very common prayer to be said as part of first event type things.
Whatever it could be.
So
Maybe.
I
Yeah.
went and sang that Shekianu prayer when I discovered it at the tomb during the first visit I made after I discovered the prayer, and I sang it, and people came over and pulled me away and said, "Don't! What are you singing? There's no singing."
Unreal. People are unreal.
Oh, so
What didn't they like about it? That
I was doing. I'm singing in some language they never heard. They don't know who the hell I am. I'm just a guy who shows up and starts singing in Hebrew.
would you sing for us, Jay?
This wasn't during the RD or anything. This was just me coming in, lying down at Baba's feet and singing the Shekianu prayer. And so they just pulled me out.
How do you feel about singing it for us now?
you probably have heard it, Betty, if you did it at the
It's
first
the same tune. I'll sing the tune. This tune, the all the prayers have the same tune. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher no, that's the Shekianu v'kivianu v'higvianu. It's easier if I do it.
Isman was it?
Yeah, businessman has I need the words.
Well, I got it.
I gotta run. I gotta go.
Okay,
Okay,
thank
thank you,
you.
Jay.
My pleasure.
Jay, we all gotta
Thank
go.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, and see you again. I sure hope so.
Okay.
Happy Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah. Jay Baba. Wow.
Right. Amazing.
Stop
Thank you for doing this, Betty. Thank you. Thank you.
Stop recording.
Just one. Yeah, thank you. Let's see. How can I? Oh, I guess. Can you do it?
I'll do it.
There you go. Okay.